Hello, everyone. Welcome to Genealogy Adventures. I'm Brian Sheffy.
And I'm Donya Williams. How are you doing today? How's my voice? Is it okay, Brian?
There's going to be an echo.
Yeah, I don't have the
Okay.
headphones.
All right. Well, apologies to anyone because there are going to be moments when we're playing video and there is going to be a bit of an echo. Thank you as always for spending the next hour with us, however you're watching us. And we have got a great show for you today, which Donnie's going to introduce.
Yes. So I want you guys to please welcome Carolyn Salguero. Carolyn graduated magna cum laude from Yale with 2 majors in art and American studies. She, the social policy studies of the latter, including African American studies, informed her journalism career and ultimately Portside, which is where she is the executive director and the founder of. She worked around the world as an award-winning freelance documentary photographer and writer from the opening of the Berlin Wall through 9/11, where she arrived at ground zero on her boat. During her intrepid photojournalism, she survived many dangerous and violent situations. She often covered racism and people who experienced discrimination, and she worked to show the culture of the people and not just describe them in terms of the prejudice they were subjected to. In New York City, after years of living overseas, the harbor became her focus, and she decided to found the Maritime nonprofit Portside, New York, to push for policy changes in New York City waterfront management, using Portside's diverse and inclusive program as inspiration, plus engaging in more traditional forms of advocacy. The racism revival of the era of Trump presidency prompted Portside to rush the launch of their African American Maritime Heritage Program in May 2018. So please welcome Carolina to the show.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you very much. It's quite an honor to be here, given the caliber of your guests. I'm going to explain on my vowels. So it's Carolina Salguero in English, and my father's from Spain. So in Spanish, I'm Carolina Salguero.
Okay.
I do speak Spanish. Yeah, it's a mouthful.
Well, I am so excited to have you on the show because I have to admit, we were actually chatting about this in the green room, that Olivia is a pretty new discovery even for me. I had never heard the name Olivia Hooker until the whole Tulsa massacre became like a national talking point. And that was the first time I'd actually heard her name, and it was only to do with her being a survivor of Tulsa. Never knew anything else until Donnie was chatting to me about, do you know this African-American woman who served in the Coast Guard? I'm like, no, tell me more. Because the way that she said it to me over the phone, it just hooked me immediately. And I guess the first question that I have for you is, what drew you to Olivia's story?
Well, I have to say, I want to kind of control some expectations. We rushed this program forward. It was the African American Maritime Heritage one. It was an intention for a while, but just I don't know what to call I sometimes just call it the racist revival of the Trump eras, which is still going on. We just rushed forward with this. And so, one of the initial program things was a history challenge for 5th graders in the local elementary schools here. So the goal was just find some people and some themes and get them up there. Honestly, we didn't ourselves know that there was that much of a maritime heritage. So we had to find that first and found her on the way. So we really started with notions like, I was pretty sure that the Underground Railroad had to use waterways, though I had not heard. No, I'm not an expert in the Underground Railroad, but I'd never heard that when I had been studying that. It was always houses and land and sort of things like that. And I thought, okay, if the waterways were the highways of the era, so we went looking that way. Then there were some other ideas like, okay, if maritime was such an important industry in certain parts of the country, colonial period, revolution early on, Black folks were probably in there somehow, but like, where were they? So we ended up finding a few books which gave us some sort of themes, but because I'm going to be honest, we're not masters of the whole heritage. It's been a kind of finding of things. And then as we got more on the page, people began to say, oh, do you know? People now send us tips. I have to confess, I'm not exactly sure how we found Olivia Hooker, Dr. Hooker. In our case, that wasn't so hard because we're a maritime organization. And I just don't remember how we found it. Because we follow a lot of maritime entities. And so I think the Coast Guard itself and people and maritime heritage organizations were elevating her. So she wasn't, for me, a really obscure find. Like I remember the story of how we found Robert Smalls, for example. But in her case, I think that one was kind of handed to us, honestly.
And I suppose, because in a way, she's going to be a difficult person to spend an hour talking about because she just did so much through the course.
She kept doing. I mean, some people are like, okay, they had a career and they worked late to like 68 or 73 and they stopped. That woman was going to over 100. I mean, she just kept going and she kept giving and pivoting and doing. And so she was 6 when the Tulsa massacre happened and she was there. And she kept returning to that through her life. So she has that whole advocacy arc to her career. She's got the maritime pieces, and then she becomes a psychologist and an impactful one as well, with a specialty in children. And I would love to ask her now, actually, was that traumatic experience at age 6 in the Tulsa massacre, is that what made you be interested in taking care of children later on? I wish I could ask her, but she's got many, many, many accomplishments.
Because from what I have gathered and what I understand, when she kind of left Ohio, she had applied to the U.S. Navy to work as a WAF twice and had been rejected. Then I believe she had, if I have the chronology wrong, please do correct me. And I believe she then applied to work for the Coast Guard. Then the Navy got back to her a third time, I guess, to kind of open the door for her to come and be an active servicewoman. But she had already kind of signed up with the Coast Guard at that point. Is there any indication in terms of the research that you've done for her, what kind of drew her to active duty? One, to active duty, to service to her country, but to do it in a maritime fashion as opposed to, say, the Army?
Well, the active duty thing, there are a number of quotes from her. I've never had the privilege to speak to her directly, where she talks about surveying and continuing to push. And so that piece, I think, is answered, and I can share some quotes. I mean, here's one right here. She says, I thought, well, it's a shame to battle for our civil rights and then have no one take advantage of it. I thought, if I survive, maybe someone else will be brave enough to come in. As to the water, that I have really no answer for. In the Google Doodle, it says, she says as her own voice, something like, I really didn't know anything about boats. So that's a missing piece. Like, this woman deserves, like I said, she deserves a proper biography at targeted adults. I have here, I was going to read some of Tulsa Girl, which is a children's book, which actually contains information I haven't seen anywhere else. And I feel that the author, Shameen Anthania Williams, herself a Black woman officer of the Coast Guard, there's Shameen, here's our lo-fi sharing, surely talked to Dr. Hooker, but I don't know why she picked water.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame. There are just questions I would love to ask her, because she, I mean, again, growing up in 2 landlocked states, being on the water must have been terrifying.
Oh, it's
interesting. If I remember correctly, can you guys hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Is this better?
Yeah, I hear you fine.
Okay. Well, if I remember correctly, she actually said in her own words that when she originally told her mom that she wanted to do it, she sat down with her with tea and that she wanted to, talk to her mother about it. And before she could even finish everything, her mother was very supportive of her joining, and she joined at a very late age in her life.
Yeah, the quote from the book,
she was young or anything like that, and her mom told her, she was like, if I was young enough, I would do it.
Yep.
So it was a big deal for her, and then she was told that she was only gonna be like cleaning the decks or washing dishes, and she didn't do any of those things.
Yeah, she said in her quote, but by Jiminy, I've never washed a pot, never scrubbed the deck.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think probably, Brian, these questions can be answered by whoever, I hope there should be several people writing books, because she really focused late in life on mentoring people. So when she was the professor of psychology at Fordham, and also working with youth at the Kennedy, I think, Children's Center, rather than doing research papers or seeking promotions or applying for the jobs, there was doing a kind of typical self, like lifting herself up and out kind of thing. She really focused on mentoring. And I'm sure that she has impacted many, many people personally. And those people will surely be able to answer those questions, because I'm sure she talked. One of the people I want to talk to for Portside's own programming in multiple ways is someone who was mentored by Dr. Hooker. And that is the current captain of the port. That's a Coast Guard title, the commandant. And that's really prestigious position. And she is the first Black woman to be the captain of the port, and also to be captain in the Coast Guard, Captain Zeta Merchant. And so I want to have Captain Merchant in some portside programs, and then I'm going to be asking questions about Dr. Hooker.
Oh, excellent. And in terms of the documents and the resources that you've used to research her, is there any, I mean, the Coast Guard absolutely embraces her today, because just find out so much about her on their various websites. Do you know how she was actually received while she was serving?
I don't. And I have to tell you, I'm inclined to think probably not well, but she must have been amazing as a person to continually do all that she's doing. But we don't have any information about that. The interviews that I found and profiles most revelatory were the ones, I guess no surprise, that were done in psychology publications. So those were more introspective and talking about sort of the life and the character. But I really haven't, but then they're focusing on when she's in their professional basket, she's in psychology. I really have not found very much about the Coast Guard thing. And this is one of the reasons why Captain Merchant is going to be of interest. And I'm really guessing that Shamin Anthony Williams, who wrote this Tulsa Girl, who's also a Coast Guard officer, that those two women are going to be, to use a maritime term, first ports of call to be asking questions like this. Because I really want to know too. Whatever I know, I'm happy to share. But right now, I don't have that.
Because I'm also saying Tulsa Girl again. You're saying Tulsa Girl again.
Oh, am I? Yeah, I explained it. So for anyone listening, this is, I guess, how traumas embed in the brain, which is something that Dr. Hooker spent time on which we'll talk about in a bit. But when I was a photojournalist, I did a story in Tuzla, not Tulsa, Tuzla, Bosnia, about the orphans who resulted from the Srebrenica massacre. There were some 8,700 Muslim men and boys mass murdered by Serbs, and I photographed the orphans. And all week I've been tangling up Tuzla and Tulsa because they're both associated with massacres in my mind. They were both. And so there you have it. So pardon that slip. I'm referring to another massacre. We had too many.
And Donia, I'd love to get your perspective on this. What kind of really struck me about Dr. Hooker's history and story, she just really struck me as a woman that had a lot of strength and fortitude. Because you think about it, her family lost everything in Tulsa. They literally had to start over again. Clearly did. That didn't seem to affect them because, as we were just chatting about, her mother was really supportive of her military endeavors and, service to country.
Brian, I'm going to say that I want to read now a section from the Tulsa Girl book. Tulsa. Oh. I'm so sorry. But, because in this book, as I said, I'm presuming that that the author, spoke to Dr. Hooker. So, and I've read in some other places that the family, I think, was fairly well off. Her father owned a department store. And as a result, salesmen came to it, and they were white salesmen. And so I've read in a few places that prior to the massacre in 1921, that Olivia, I'm going to use her little girl name now, Olivia had positive experiences with white people. So this is the first wave of shock that happens to her. So in the book it says, but then she hid beneath the table and watched the angry men. Aren't these our visiting salesmen? I thought they were our friends. And so that men that she had seen being nice to her while they're trying to sell something to her father, actually attack the home. So,
Wow.
so you have then.
Can I just jump in for just a quick sec before you
Sure.
go? So she actually recognized certain faces in the crowd.
This is what I'm deducing. So I've not spoken to the author, and I can't speak to Olivia Beyond the Grave, but I've seen other references to this idea of salesman. So whether it was specific salesmen or she was used to white salesmen, and you can imagine they're trying to sell something to her dad. They're probably giving her lollipops. They're buttering her up. You know, they're all whatever. And then they physically came in and attacked the home. So they were willing off to have a piano, and they, you know, in one of the pictures here, they're smashing. I don't know if you can see this on the. They're smashing the piano. They destroyed her grandmother's bed. So they, you know, hand to hand, like individually attack things in the home while they're actually present. Oh yeah, and her mother had told Olivia and 3 siblings to stay underneath the table. So, and there's a cloth, like a long tablecloth over it. So there they are hearing all of this. And then, and I want to read this because of what you said, Brian, that it seems to be okay. They can move out. The role of her mother, I think, is very important because she refers to, she refers to it later on in her life. And this is what, basically, I think she had PTSD for a while. So it says here, but amidst the frightful scene, her mom was quick to fend. The home she worked so hard to build, she headed for the gunman. So there's a drawing here of a bunch of white men, the mob at the door. And notice actually they have ties on a bunch of them too. You know, I think the salesman idea. And her mother confronts them and says, why are you shooting innocent people? You know this isn't right. The gunman ordered her to leave, but she wouldn't without a fight. She's holding a baby. The one thing about the story is not explained who's the baby. She handed in the baby and marched her way back home. And in New York, we call this chutzpah, the Yiddish term. And with water buckets, she put out fires, and Olivia watched her in a zone. What happens to Olivia afterwards, once they leave, so the family has money as opposed to some survivors of the massacre because there's a safe. They burned down her father's department store. It's all gone, but there's a safe standing on the rubble, and there's a bond in it. And that bond they sell, and that gives them money to leave. So once they've moved to Columbus, Ohio, she refuses to go to school. She won't go to school because they're white teachers. And she absolutely refuses to do this, and she's having nightmares at night, and she will not go to a school where there are white teachers. And the description of this looks to me like PTSD. She absolutely refuses. She won't go. And so in the book, it says here, her mother, if the teachers look like that angry mob that took my family away, if the principal looks like the guy with the gun, I'll never go to school, no way, right? So her mother's really concerned, and the book just says she decided to find a doctor to seek help on what to do. In this book, it doesn't elaborate what kind of doctor or what happens. That is not successful. The doctor says to keep her at home, and what happens is she has a dream one night. And what happens in the dream, according to the book, is the mother appears in her dream, and the instant her mother charged the gunman and demanded her rights be recognized, she moved with courage, strength, and dignity, grit bellowed from her eyes. And that gave Olivia a whole new feeling the next day, and she decides to go to school. So wow. I don't know how much of this is fictionalized or true, but it feels like truth to me, and it would be logical. And then she goes on later in life as a psychologist she does specialize with children with, her dissertation is on children with Down syndrome, which is not a trauma thing, that's genetic, but she also does work on children with learning disabilities and a strong focus on children. And it's one of the things I wish I could ask her. I mean, is her own traumatic experience at age 6 something that got her into that? And then, of course, if she felt that way about white people, well, to go into the military, which is white and racist, she has to have found a way to overcome or manage that sufficiently to do those things. But
or cope with it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, she had to find a way to cope.
Because
what was the title of the book again?
The book is Tulsa Girl. It's on our webpage, Tulsa Girl.
There we go.
I'm trying to, I can't really see. There you go. Tulsa Girl.
So again, I'd really be interested in getting as well Donnia's input on this. So kind of over the last 2 years, we've spoken about a lot of women who were at the forefront of civil rights movements and, who were amongst the first to achieve certain things. And it's the common denominator behind all of them, their determination, their fortitude, their striving force, is a strong Black mother. Have you noticed that in the last 2 seasons, Danya?
Yeah.
I wish I had one.
Our mothers are, they are excellent people. They're wonderful. And it's just, they have, there's a song by the OJs when they do the family reunion, and they literally go into a detail on what mothers, the role of the mom in the family. And the mom does everything. Like she does it all. And then when it goes to the role of dad, it says he nurtures their son. But mom nurtures everybody. She teaches everything. She goes through all of the everything that you have to learn as a child. Mom is the person that is actually teaching all of that. But when it goes to dad, he says the father deals with the son. And he goes, this, that, and the third. He teaches him this. He shows him how to be a man. But he doesn't really go into detail on it the way he does for a mom. Whereas mom, she does everything. She does the cooking, the cleaning. She teaches the children, not just the daughter, but the children, how to do and be the way they're supposed to be. So Black mothers and mothers as a whole, we have so much responsibility that it's ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous.
Because I'm sitting here thinking, at least in terms of Dr. Hooker, she would have seen her mother stand up to these white men as Tulsa is literally, if they're part of Tulsa, Greenwood is literally burning on fire. Shots are ringing, planes coming overhead with bombs dropping. And she is seeing her mother square up and face off against this clear and present danger. So maybe she was thinking, listen, as hard as some of the challenges I have in my life, it will never be as hard as what my mother had to do in 1921.
Exactly. And I think that goes back to the person, Mother Shazier, who we spoke to last week, and how she even just told us, she was like, the stuff that our children that have gone through, and she's like 2 generations into the children, because she's old enough to be she's old enough to be my mother's mother. And she was born in 1913. My mom was born in 39. So she has generations ahead of us. And she's talking about what she had to do and the differences of our kids now and then, and how they don't have much that they need to do. So it's very interesting to see the role of a mom, whether she be white or Black, and what it is that she has to do in order for her children to grow healthy and knowledgeable and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. And I'm also curious, Carolina, how long did Olivia actually serve in the Coast Guard? And has she received any kind of formal kind of award afterwards or kind of accolades?
She didn't serve very long, but that's because World War II ended. So we can't blame her for that. So she joined in February 1945. The war ends September of 45. And her unit was disbanded in mid 1946. So she served until it's disbanded. So it's not very long. There was a surge of honors on her centennial. She survived. I mean, it kind of makes me feel bad. What if she had lived to be 100? Once on her 100th birthday, there was a lot of recognition. And so there is a Coast Guard down in DC. There's a part of a Coast Guard facility that's named after her. In Fort Wadsworth, here in New York City, which is the Coast Guard headquarters in this port. It's a dining facility that's named after her. I think there was another honor. And then President Obama attended the 134th commencement of the Coast Guard Academy in 2015. And she was present, and he concluded his remarks referring to her. And other people spoke. So on her 100th birthday, there was quite a bit of stuff, but, she deserves more.
But she lived well beyond 100. She lived like to like 109, 110, something like that. 103.
6 was it?
Yes, I know she lived. She definitely lived.
No, 103. 103. Here it is. Born 1915. She passed in 2018. It was the same year we were launching our program. So, yeah.
And did she go into academia straight after she finished with the Coast Guard, or was there a period in between?
Not much. I think she's another case of the GI Bill. I mean, it's definitely proven, but I mean, it feels to me, that I don't know how long she thought about it, obviously, but she uses the GI benefits to go to college, and then she gets her master's at the Teachers Union at Columbia. And the quotes as I kept reading more and more profiles, I mean, she was denied over and over again. And so she was told there after a master's that she wasn't intelligent enough to get a higher degree. And so she then doesn't try and get a PhD there. That's when she moves upstate and works for a women's prison correctional facility. And
she did some really, from what I understand, she did some really amazing work there with, again, marginalized women whose intelligence was questioned about whether or not it was even worth providing these imprisoned women with an education. And she seems to have seen something in them, or at least seen the potential of maybe not all of the female prisoners, but a goodly majority of them.
Yeah, from what I've read, and this is featured more in the media from the psychology world, talking about her career, was the women were considered to have learning disabilities, though it hasn't been described to me what exactly. And so I think they were just kind of dismissively shunted aside. And so she decided to really focus in on them and to help them get better education and jobs. So from what I've read, what she started at that correctional facility continues to be their practice, and so she just strikes me as someone who proceeds with an extraordinary amount of empathy, like really seeing people, not going by presumptions. One of the quotes from her regarding that period of time was, "Don't judge a person by the letters behind their name, because there are very often cases in which you can learn something from the person that's scrubbing the doorstep." And, with race, there's racism and there's sexism, there's classism, and then kind of just snobberies where those people are dismissed. I always say to people, working here at Portside, particularly young people, interns, don't ever use the term unskilled labor. There is no labor that lacks skills. And someone who's thinking about it will do every job better. And also, if you want to learn how the world works, talk to maintenance people. The people who fix things that are broken, that's where you can go learn how to make a better thing. And I was told, I didn't come up with it on my own. I was told that back in the days when there was a J&R record store, before we had Yelp and Google's and all these reviews. If you want to go buy some technology, go talk to the repair people down in the basement and ask them which electronics are always breaking. I thought, what a clever idea. And I use that with my journalism. Get rid of presumptions about people. Just, see the person. And it seems to me she really was someone who did that profoundly and consistently. And so she changes lives that way.
And maybe that was based on just that little snippet that you said about when she was at Columbia and people were saying, well, you're not intelligent enough to get an advanced degree. Maybe because she saw that being done to her, she didn't want to do that to other people.
Could be. Yeah. Learn from, what happens to you. But I mean, all the biographies I've read, articles are not biography books, there are frequent quotes that she's repeated where she's been dismissed about this thing. Like, you're only going to scrub pots and pans or scrub the deck. You're not intelligent enough to get a higher degree. No way. It is noteworthy that when she got her doctorate at the University of Rochester, she herself said, "I wasn't a typical student." She was the only Black person and the only woman. And at that point, she was an older student. But, soon after that, by 1963, she's joined Fordham, where she works until 1985. And she led a mentoring program for what was described as ethnic minority students. and, was known for wanting to give voice to African American psychologists, and really, again, mentoring, focusing on the people who will then go help other people and make sure you see people.
Because again, she was it psychology or psychiatry? Which of the two?
Psychology.
Psychology. So given the time period, she wouldn't have seen many people who looked like her. Not in that field.
I don't think in anything she did. I think she was she was the only Black person in that class. She was one of the few Black women in the Coast Guard. I mean, everywhere she goes, she is a first, and she's unusual. So she's blazing trails everywhere. And even the field she's working on. So she writes her dissertation on autism. Now, I'm not a specialist in autism, but I have a friend actually who is. And I think, as a society, we have learned a lot about autism very recently. I think in 1961, I don't think autism is a really common area of study. I think she's early into that sort of thing. She's really a trailblazer wherever she goes.
Yeah.
And that can be a very lonely, very intimidating place to be. And I'm just going to give a quick analogy. Back in the 90s, living in England, I was the only person of color in a boardroom in the advertising industry. And, you just learn to roll up your sleeves. You kind of read between the lines, and you learn how to read people. You learn how to read the room. You're the only person of color there. And then she had it twice. She was the only person of color and a woman. It's really intimidating, and it just kind of speaks volumes about her fortitude that she didn't let that get to her, and she just stepped up and she just did it. She just did what she wanted to do.
Well, fortitude was the word I was going to use. The other thing I found myself thinking quite a bit about is she didn't have what is another typical support structure. She never married. So she had no spouse. And I've not heard anything about a male partner. It said, from what I read, that she had fallen in love, and sadly, the guy died of a heart attack. So therefore, she also never had children, out of it. So she didn't have her own children. She didn't have a husband or a partner. And so she's constantly doing this trailblazing. And I find myself increasingly wondering, what sustained this fortitude? Where did she go when this was all too heavy? Or was she always just able to, how did she do this? She's really quite strong and striking in that way.
May have a little glimpse of that based on my own personal kind of experience. I took it as a gauntlet, like the advertising industry threw a gauntlet on the ground. All of these very wealthy, powerful white men, because I don't even think in the 10 years I was in advertising, I don't even think I saw a woman. To be perfectly honest, other than a secretary or an executive assistant, there were no female creatives in those boardrooms.
They're the people with the coffee.
With that being said, this is why we do the kind of shows that we do. We do these shows because our children don't even realize that there are still young girls and young boys today that are in these predominantly white schools. And it's on, like, take for example, right now here in the Maryland area, in Frederick County, Maryland, there is a school that has over, I think, 800 students in it. And out of the 800 students, 25 are white. Are black.
Black.
That's it. So we're constantly going through this type of thing all the time. But our kids don't realize that this has been done before. And they need to know that this has been done before and they can make it through. But because they're not being taught this information, number one, you got the white kids thinking, oh, you know what? You're behind, you're slow, you can't do it. You just got lucky because you live in this area and that's what it is. And you got the black kids actually believing that. So that's where the problem comes in. This is why we do these types of shows, because our children, meaning all of them, not just black, white, Native American, Indian, all, just everybody, Chinese, Japanese, they all need to know that we all have a stand and a point in what happened in America today. But the history that's being taught to them now is just not the truth. It's not all of it. It's not everything. And Ms. Hooker's history is so kept out that it shouldn't be. And I'm just so glad that you were able to come up here and actually talk about her.
Oh, I think we just lost. I think we just lost her, but I believe I am in control of the the broadcast. I'm going to follow on with what Donnia's the point that she was making, because I think it was something that you wanted to mention as well, Carolina, and that is, oh, you're back.
My computer, I swear to God, like I cleaned my screen by accident, and when I clean my screen, it acts ugly. So I don't know what's going. It just kicked me out.
So I'm going to build on what Donnia was saying, and I think it's something that you wanted to talk about, Carolina, because unfortunately it was a video that you had hoped that we could air, but we couldn't get the copyright permission for. And that is, representation matters. When you know that you're marginalized, you come from a marginalized people, it's important. And I think a large segment, and it's not just America, of I'm going to say of white society doesn't quite get it. When you consistently see depictions on TV, film, in a classroom, your teachers, your workplace, your town, that don't look like you, you don't think that you can do these things. So that's, again, the wonderful thing that Olivia did is, now, if young women want to serve in the Coast Guard or they want to serve in the Navy, it's not just Olivia. I mean, there are other women who have gone on to achieve those things. As soon as you can see it, that's something that you can realistically aspire to.
I think that undeniably representation really, really matters. And that's one of the reasons, and that's the main reason why we did this, it was for the fifth graders in the history challenge. It was for not only we Portside are in the neighborhood of Red Hook in Brooklyn, New York, which is primarily a Black-brown neighborhood. And so we want to speak to our neighbors. But I profoundly feel that this is history that all Americans should know, and that most Americans have not been taught a complete history. I have to say, I mean, for the African American history I had taken and thought I knew about, I myself didn't know about the Tulsa massacre until relatively recently. I can't tell you when that was. Was it 10 years ago or sort of something? The other thing I want to say is I think integration in schools and early on makes a huge difference. I remember talking to my mother at some point. I'm 61 years old, was born in 1961. It's sometime within maybe the past 8 years I talked to her and I said, noting how I'd had this lifelong interest in African-American history and racism, and it was stuff that I covered. It really perturbed me whenever I found it in countries where I was reporting. I said, Mom, were there a lot of other white kids in my elementary school? And she just started to laugh. And she goes, no, it was like you and the two Hatch boys. Oh yeah, maybe I think the Hills maybe had a kid in there. And so basically I went to a school that was majority Black. Wow. And it's like Olivia's story when she's little is that unless an adult tells you about racism, children don't have it. And I can remember when I was taking AFAM classes at Yale under Skip Gates, which was super exciting. Talking, it was a Black women's fiction class, talking about there's this moment where the Black child, they can see their own Blackness, but they learn the consequences of racism. And so in Olivia's case, it's 6 when the white salesman kind of come in. And I can remember when I learned it because I brought a classmate home from my elementary school and had racist neighbors, and they used the N-word on her, and she was crying. And because we decided we would never subject another kid to that. So I didn't bring Black kids home again, not because we were racist, but because that would be hurtful to them with racist neighbors. And so I learned it too, because I clearly had Black classmates, but it didn't come with any significance. And that's how little children are. We adults do this to kids.
And see, that's a perfect example of when, and this is where sometimes I kind of piss off our Black audience, because I see both sides. So I understand the fact that you actually had to deal with something like that. But if you had not explained that it's not that you guys are racist, it was the fact that you didn't want to subject that child to that. So that's why that's why that child, you stopped bringing the child around. And what people, you know, we don't think about that. We just automatically assume, oh, they stopped bringing a child around because they're racist. It's not, and sometimes it's not like that. We have to learn as African Americans, as white people, as whatever, we have to learn how to think outside the box and not to automatically assume that somebody is doing something because of that reason. It's always could be, it can always be something different, something else. So I really, you know, you're muted, Carolyn. I did. I fixed it. It must have been my computer.
Okay, fine. That's okay. I told you I'm TMI, so it was probably a good strategy. I mean, I wish that I could be as optimistic as that and say it's always could be something else. I mean, honestly, it is so often racism. But you know, yeah, my elementary school experience taught me that because frankly, it was so natural. I didn't think about that until many years later when I'm formally studying racism as a college student. You know what that means for me, because it was just a kind of natural soup for me. It didn't have any consequence, you know, and you know, of course, I can't learn about racism because I have the privilege of I can't learn about it as a Black person because I have the privilege of my white skin, which will buffer me. I know this, and even though I can know that, that means I can't still know at all ever, as hard as I try, the experience of being on the receiving end of it. But I wish we lived in a better world.
Oh, that's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. So I wanted to ask a question about just Maritime as a whole for African Americans in Maritime. How much information do you, because this was something that was a really big deal for Brian when we first, you know, got into it. We wanted to know about sailors getting into, you know, the Army and into the Navy and things of that nature. So what kind of, and I know you have some information on that as well that you wanted to share.
Yeah, here's what I realized. Actually, it's really great talking to the two of you because I'm going to write a list afterwards of the research that we have to do. Because I realized what I don't have is a statistic about percentages of Black, white within American Maritime. Now, what I'm also going to say about the thing about Maritime is, if I speak about it now, it's quite a large category. So it can include things like military Maritime. That's really its own special world, you know, Navy and Coast Guard. And honestly, that's not a part I know too much about. Then you have things like work boats, which is tugboats and barges and construction and things like that in domestic waters. That's called brown water, staying in domestic water, not going in the ocean. Then there's the blue water, which means the ocean people, you're on much bigger ships going somewhere else. That has a whole other kind of staffing hierarchy and frankly has, using the word outsourcing, I mean, basically they're mostly foreign flag ships. And so therefore they tend to be crewed from underdeveloped nations where they can pay them a pittance relative to American labor. So you will end up with officers who will be European descended, like white Americans or Europeans from Europe. And then you have Filipino and Indian and sort of whatever kind of crews on them. And then you have yachts and tall ships. And so the whole heritage and nonprofit end of Maritime tends to be more progressive, crunchy granola. And so there you're going to have much more progressive politics, more women, more visibly gay people. I can't tell you whether they're necessarily more Black people because I have to tell you, at least in the places in this country where I've been in Maritime, they're the whitest spaces I know. So New York City is not a majority white city, and Maritime events are unbelievably white. So this became also a reason to be doing this because we would like at Portside not just to be talking about history in an inclusive fashion. We would like to make this an inclusive space now. And and the crews are overwhelmingly white and male. So nationally, there are 12% women in Maritime. Okay, 12.
Wow.
Internationally, it's between 2 and 3%. Okay, so that's women. And everyone starts talking about Black women. I don't know how small that number is, and Black men, I'm going to guess, are more. But it's you know it's a very white and male space.
Well, I was going to say it's also not easy to get a hold of the records because I've been researching for a client. His ancestry came from Escambia County, Florida. So we're talking, his ancestor was a free man of color who was alive in the earlier half of the 1800s. And until I think it's the 1840 census, there was a special schedule for, men who worked, either worked as sailors or they worked on the domestic route. But as I said, the records themselves are really, really hard to find.
Well, there's a book. So let me pull back. I was talking about the contemporary situation. Back in the day, there were, and I don't know whether they're Black women. I would love to find Black women in the age of sail on boats. But in terms of Black men, that is also, at least in the Northeast, in New England in particular, the term person of color is particularly apt because there were a lot of Native Americans. And so some of the boats might be referring to, people of color or colored, meaning they could have been Native American or Black. And then there was a lot of intermarrying for a number of reasons. But it was the largest, here's a quote from our website. Before the turn of the 20th century, maritime industries provided the greatest opportunities for Black employment and investment in America. And I think one of the reasons why this African-American maritime heritage may not be known is also because maritime heritage isn't really taught itself very much. So if you don't talk about maritime and then you're racist and basically scrub the Blacks out of it, well, you've lost it, for two reasons. But between the Revolution and the Civil War, more African Americans were employed in the maritime trades than in any other industry. What's also noteworthy is not only employed, they were able to be investors or owners often. And one of the things I would say about maritime from the historical stuff that I've read, but it's also been my experience on boats when I was a photojournalist and whatever, there tends to be an extraordinary pragmatism on boats. So yes, the various isms that can be ashore, the racism and the sexism or classism may exist, but basically boating can be hazardous of all forms. And so people who do the job well, who can acquit themselves, there's a kind of pragmatism that does a lot to suppress the isms that happen ashore. So a book that I want to highly recommend, Skip Finley wrote it. It's about colored whaling captains. People of colors, you put again color because they could be Native American or Black or bi blended, and talks about that there. Where yes, there was still racism, but you could have a Black captain order people, white people, around in a boat, and that same man, once he gets ashore, even up north, could be facing issues. Down south, by the way, the rules that they came up with for northern vessels, because there were so many Black mariners, the Southerners were really freaked out about Black mariners with all of their capabilities and sense of liberty getting off the boats. I forget which state it was. They even said they had to go to jail if you can get this. They had to stay in the local jail if they were going to get off the boat, and they really wanted to prevent that kind of contact. And of course, these boats were also serving not only as a watery underground railroad to take people out, but they were bringing information, because that's how information moved. And so the specter of Black mariners, like a boat, there were boats that sailed from New England to the South in the period of slavery with Black captains and all Black crew. You can imagine what that's like for a white, Southern town to see that arrive.
So we have a video queued up of an address done by President Obama. And Carolina, did you want to kind of lead the segue into that video, just to tell the audience a little bit about what they can expect, why that's such an important...
really carries the day. But I just want to say what the event is. It's a Coast Guard commencement. So it's the 134th, the Coast Guard's that old, graduating commencement address. And Olivia Hooker is there. I think it's her centennial. I think she's 100 years old. Yes, it's 2015. Exactly. So that's what it is.
And I want to leave you with a story that captures the persistence and the patriotism that this work requires, because this is a nation made up of folks who know how to do hard things. Down in the front row is Dr. Olivia Hooker. 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. When she was just 6 years old, her African-American community was attacked by white mobs. It was a horrific racial incident, and hundreds of innocent African-Americans were killed. The mobs destroyed her father's clothing store. They looted her house. They even burned the little clothes for her doll. And Olivia could have given in to bitterness. She could have been pessimistic about her country. Instead, she made it better. So in World War II, she enlisted as a SPAR, becoming the first African-American woman in the Coast Guard. As a yeoman, in Boston, she served with distinction. By the time the war was won, she was discharged. She was a petty officer, second class. With the GI Bill, Olivia earned her master's, then her doctorate. She has been a professor and mentor to her students, a passionate advocate for Americans with disabilities, a psychologist counseling young children, a caregiver at the height of the AIDS epidemic, a tireless voice for justice and equality. A few months ago, Olivia turned 100 years old. So Olivia, you're gonna have to tell us your secret. She's still as sharp as they come and as fearless. In Yonkers, New York, she even still volunteers as a member of the Coast Guard Auxiliary and was determined to be with us here today. So Dr. Hooker, thank you. You're an inspiration.
That was amazing.
But I'm sitting here thinking, you have to wait to be 100 years old to get your flowers. At least she got them, and she got them from a president of a sitting president of the United States.
Led a remarkable life.
But there's still something coming through my feed.
I got it.
The other thing we haven't talked about is her role on the trying to get restitution for the survivors of and the descendants of the Tulsa massacre. So she was one of the founders of the commission. So she was working on that actively too, while she's doing all of her other career things. So the commission in Oklahoma starts in 1977. They proposed that Oklahoma pay $33 million in restitution. There were 121 surviving victims they had located. This drags on. 2001, the commission publishes its final report. No money granted. So a private religious charity, the Tulsa Metropolitan Ministry, pays $28,000 to the survivors, a little bit more than $200 apiece, right? Then she tried again with a federal lawsuit. In 2003, she was part of that group that was also unsuccessful. The Supreme Court refused to hear the case. So, since then, there's been a reconciliation park. I don't know why it should be called reconciliation. I don't know why people who've been massacred should reconcile. But Reconciliation Park, Memorial Tower, an interpretive center. So the massacre and what happened has been memorialized, but there weren't reparations, restitution. But she said about that in her incredible way. Where was the quote on this? This was in an interview first in 2007, she testified in Congress. And she says, "You don't give up hope, you keep unplugging." And then in a 2012 interview, talking about, the violence and what happened there and how people still shoot guns in the crowd, she said, "I keep harping on that. Let's see what are the stresses and strains on that person's life that make them believe the way they're behaving. I haven't figured it out, but I'm still working on it." Which I find to be extraordinary, because that's a psychologist speaking kind of actually in an empathetic way about racists who are murdering and,
Are you there?
I was muted for a second, so I shut up.
Okay. I saw it. I'm sorry. It's just jumping.
I should have a mute on me more often. You're okay. No need to worry about that. So she, to in last year's was trying to figure out why people do what they do, even if it's racist violence.
Yeah.
And
Well,
again, that just kind of speaks to the generosity of spirit.
right. Well, again, I really want to thank you. We have come to 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes.
And we haven't even asked the audience any questions. I feel terrible.
It's okay. they were listening, and just as you can see, it was popping up. If ever you want to go on to the Facebook page, you can go up there and talk to them or what have you, because it is very interactive, and they were very in on it. And they appreciated you as much as we appreciate you and what you.
I appreciate all of you and what you're doing. I hope that this talk inspires a lot of student papers about Dr. Hooker, dissertations, theses, and finally a proper adult book biography about this woman.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for this incredible opportunity. I hope it's been helpful. And it's been really interesting talking to you too.
It really has. Brian, you're freezing in and out. Am
I?
Yeah.
Can you hear me though?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Okay. I guess in the closing minutes of the show, I mean, there were 3 top things you wanted the audience to take away about Olivia, about Dr. Hooker. What would those 3 things be?
Oh dear, I'm always terrible at lists. You should have told me in advance. It's like, let me see, top 3 things.
It doesn't have to be 3. What would be some of the top things you would want people to take away about her?
You know what happened was I started with her as a Maritime story, and then I learned that she was so much more than a Maritime story, and I'm going to get choked up now. I'm really moved by her dedication to mentoring other people, that rather than doing research and pursuing quote unquote career advancement, she chose to invest in other people. And I find that really moving, inspiring, noble, and persuasive.
Awesome.
She was also in the Coast Guard. It's kind of how I feel about her right now. I mean, she busted in, and that was great, and that I hope helped it, make it easier for other Black women and women to do that. To me, she has emerged as a very fascinating, complicated person with such a long life of work. And I just want, I want people to do some more research so I have more to read about her.
Right. Well, I want to thank you again for being on the show. Next week is going to wrap up our Women's History Month. Please stay on before we click off. But I wanted to let you know that, I wanted to let the team know that, let everybody know that next week we will be closing out with Karen. Her last name is Finley. Her first name just went away from me, but her last name is Finley. She is a National Park Service officer, and she will actually be coming and talking to us about one of my favorite women in history, Cathay Williams. If you guys don't know who Cathay Williams is, you were introduced to her in the movie that just came out with Idris and Elba and
The Harder They Fall.
Yes, The Harder They Fall. She was Cuffy in that. And that's what we learned, but her story was not covered. So please, please, please join us for that show, because Miss Cathay Williams was something else.
She was fired.
Yes, God, she was everything. So definitely join us for that show. So go ahead.
I realized one thing I never said, actually. I think I said our URL once, but at the very beginning, I just put it in the chat. I don't know if the guests can see it. So if people want to know more about the research we've done, our website is Portside, New York, spelloutnewyork.org. And then under programs, there's AFAM Maritime is the extension on that. Mm-hmm. And by the way, we take suggestions, tips, corrections, so don't be shy.
Okay. So Danya?
Thank you guys for being here. And thank you, Kathy. Who was that said that? Kathy Mullins, for wishing me a happy belated birthday. I agree. I appreciate that.
Happy birthday.
So we will see you here next week, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until then, I'm Brian Sheffy.
And I'm Danya Williams. Carolyn, stay on the line.
Okay.
See you guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.